Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News, an Indian perspective on All India Radio. This is Renuka, and with me is Aditi Lumba, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment, and more. The headlines. In Afghanistan, dozens of women protest in Kabul against school closures for girls. ASEAN pulls up Myanmar for non-participation in the summit meeting. World Meteorological Organization says greenhouse gas at new record levels. Temperature rise to far exceed Paris Agreement targets. US lifts existing stringent travel restrictions, issues new vaccine rules for international travel. BIMSTEC to adopt connectivity master plan in upcoming Colombo summit. India's Sameer Verma advances to second round of men's singles of FrenchOpen badminton. And at the T20 World Cup, South Africa beat West Indies by 8 wickets against at Dubai. As India has created history by vaccinating 100 crore people against COVID-19, All India Radio salutes all the doctors, nurses, other frontline workers and all those who got vaccinated and made this possible. Even though the country has achieved this feat, we caution our listeners that the battle against COVID is not yet over. We appeal to our listeners to get fully vaccinated at the earliest and also help others get vaccinated. During the festival season, please follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki duri for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011 2397 8046 and 1075. And now the news in detail. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi met Taliban's acting Deputy Prime Minister Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar in Doha. This is the latest high-level contact between the two sides since the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban. According to reports, the meeting took place Monday evening. The spokesperson for Taliban's political office, Mohammad Naeem, said that in the meeting both sides discussed mutual relations, political and economic issues. Ahead of the talks, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin said the talks will provide an opportunity to have an in-depth exchange of views on Afghanistan's situation and issues of joint concern. Elsewhere, Pentagon Press Secretary John Kirby said on Monday that the U.S. government is still working to continue the flow of American citizens and special immigrant visa holders out of Afghanistan. Mr. Kirby said that currently there are just over 3,000 Afghan evacuees in the U.S. Central Command region. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, dozens of women came out on the streets of Kabul on Tuesday to protest against the closure of schools for girls and slammed the international community for their inaction. According to reports, the women gathered at the gates of the United Nations Assistance Mission. They accused the international community, human rights groups and the United Nations of indifference to the treatment meted towards Afghan women by the Taliban. Earlier in the day, UN Secretary General Special Representative for Afghanistan, Deborah Lyons, met women from provinces across Afghanistan and heard their views on the considerable challenges facing women in the country. Meanwhile, Japan will extend emergency grant aid of $65 million to Afghanistan and neighboring countries. In a statement, the Japanese Foreign Ministry said that the humanitarian needs in the region are growing. The Secretary of Security Council of the Kyrgyz Republic, Lieutenant General Murat Imankulov, visited India for the first India-Kyrgyzstan strategic dialogue on Tuesday. The two sides held discussions on threats and challenges facing both countries as well as the regional security environment with special reference to Afghanistan. During the dialogue, Lieutenant General Imankulov met National Security Advisor Mr. Ajit Doval.
The leaders of the Southeast Asian regional grouping, ASEAN, have rebuked the military government of Myanmar for not taking part in the summit meeting of the organization, which started today. ASEAN had earlier decided to downgrade the participation of Myanmar to a non-political level, which was rejected by Myanmar as violating the ASEAN Charter. A report from our special correspondent Rajesh Jha.
The leaders of the ASEAN regional grouping have rebuked Myanmar for not participating in the summit meeting which opened today. Myanmar refused to send any representative to the 38th summit after ASEAN decided to downgrade the participation from Myanmar to a non-political representative. The unprecedented step of ASEAN came after Myanmar did not allow the ASEAN Special Envoy to visit the country as part of the 5-point agreement reached during the April meeting of the grouping. Blaming Myanmar for the situation, the Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen said that ASEAN did not expel Myanmar, but Myanmar abandoned its right. He said that now ASEAN is in a position of ASEAN -1. Cambodia is scheduled to become the chairman of the group next year. The Indonesian President Joko Widodo called it an unwelcome attitude by Myanmar. He said that it is important for ASEAN to honor the principles of non-interference, but we are also obligated to hold other principles like democracy, good governance, respect for human rights and a constitutional government. Earlier on Monday, the Myanmar Ministry of Foreign Affairs had said that ASEAN's decision to downgrade the level of its participation in the summit was not in line with the ASEAN Charter or the group's president. Rajesh Jha, World News, All India Radio, Dhaka.
Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan met virtually on Tuesday with Myanmar's National Unity Government's representatives Dua Lashi La and Zinmar Ong. Mr. Sullivan underscored continued U.S. support for the pro-democracy movement in the country, and they discussed ongoing efforts to restore Burma's path to democracy. In a statement, Mr. Sullivan expressed concern over what it termed the military's brutal violence and the recent arrest of pro-democracy activist Ko Jimmy. Mr. Sullivan reiterated U.S. support for ASEAN efforts to hold the Myanmar military government to its obligations under the 5-point consensus. Elsewhere, the White House said that President Biden will announce the intent to provide up to $102 million in new initiatives to expand the U.S.-ASEAN strategic partnership during the U.S.-ASEAN summit.
The regional grouping BIMSTEC will adopt the Connectivity Master Plan, which includes 267 projects worth $124 billion in its forthcoming summit at Colombo. Announcing this during a symposium on Monday, the Secretary General of BIMSTEC, Tenzin Lexhel, said that the BIMSTEC Charter will also be signed during the forthcoming 5th summit at Colombo, as member states have completed the negotiation. The summit at Colombo will also sign 3 legal instruments on mutual legal assistance in criminal matters, MOU on cooperation in diplomatic academies and training institutions and establishment of the BIMSTEC Technology Transfer Facility. The Secretary General said that the member states have also ratified the BIMSTEC Convention on Cooperation in Combating International Terrorism, Transnational Organized Crime and Illicit Drug Trafficking. U.S. President Joe Biden on Monday unveiled a new set of guidelines to regulate international travel. The new order imposes new vaccine requirements for most foreign national air travelers and lifts severe travel restrictions on China, India and much of Europe. The White House, in a statement, said that the order is to come into effect from the 8th of November. The new international air travel policy requires foreign national travelers to the United States to be fully vaccinated. They are required to provide proof of vaccination status prior to boarding an airplane to fly to the U.S. Fully vaccinated foreign nationals will also be able to travel across the northern and southwest land borders for non-essential reasons such as tourism starting the 8th of November. The vaccines accepted will include FDA-approved or authorized and World Health Organization WHO emergency use listed EUL vaccines. Travelers can find full details about the air travel announcement on the CDC and Department of State websites.
The United States on Monday strongly condemned the actions of Sudanese military forces. In a statement, the U.S. State Department rejected the dissolution of the civilian-led transitional government and its associated institutions and called for their immediate restoration. It added that the U.S. firmly supports the Sudanese people's demand for a civilian-led transition to democracy. Meanwhile, protests continued on the streets of Sudan after the country's armed forces launched a military coup. According to reports, they have blocked roads in the capital Khartoum and around the country following the takeover. The World Meteorological Organization, WMO, has sounded a massive warning for humanity regarding the deteriorating climate change situation. The UN Weather Agency, in its latest greenhouse gas bulletin, published on Monday, has found that the abundance of heat-trapping greenhouse gases in the atmosphere once again reached a new record last year. A report.
Greenhouse gases are heat-trapping gases which retain some of the Earth's outgoing energy in the atmosphere. The latest report finds that we are way off track in terms of limiting temperature increase. It said by the end of this century, temperature rise will be far in excess of the Paris Agreement targets of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. These findings are in consonance with those of the IPCC's sixth assessment report, which termed the current climate crisis a code red for humanity. The report also stated that the COVID-driven economic slowdown merely sparked a temporary decline in new emissions. It has had no discernible impact on the atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases or their growth rates. Worryingly, the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin notes that part of Amazonia has transitioned from a carbon sink to a carbon source. This means that parts of the Amazon rainforest is no longer effective in soaking up carbon dioxide and has become a net emitter of the gas. It added that the capacity of land ecosystems and oceans to absorb emissions may become a less effective buffer against temperature increases in the future. The findings of the bulletin assume immense significance as we head into the COP26 conference in Glasgow, where nations will converge for negotiations on climate action. Renu Kataria for World News, AIR.
India's Environment Minister Bhupendra Yadav has said that it is now or never for concrete global actions to address climate change. He was speaking at the Middle East Green Initiative Summit 2021 in Riyadh. He underlined the need to consider the stage of development, historical responsibility, equity, national circumstances and priorities, common but differentiated responsibilities, and respective capacities to address the challenges of climate change. Mr. Yadav also highlighted the steps taken by India to combat climate change. He underlined that green policies in India are seen in the context of sustainable development and inclusive economic growth. He said that the Indian government endeavours to address all the three dimensions of sustainable development: social, economic and environmental. This is All India Radio giving you the world news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison on Tuesday released Australia's long-term emissions reduction plan to deliver net zero emissions by 2050. The UK on Monday, which holds the presidency of the summit, published a climate finance delivery plan to provide clarity on when and how developed countries will meet the $100 billion climate finance goal on Monday. The new outlook states that the goal will be met from 2023. This is 3 years later than what was committed to by the developed countries at the Paris summit in 2015. In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the developed nations' delay climate financing commitment ahead of COP26. In conversation are Dr. C.K. Varshane, an environmentalist, and Sanjay Jha, a journalist.
12 years ago, at a United Nations Climate Summit in Copenhagen, rich nations made a significant pledge. They promised to channel $100 billion a year to less wealthy nations, developing countries, by 2020 to help them adapt to climate change and mitigate further rises in temperature. Now we are just a few days ahead of the global summit COP26, which is going to take place in the Scottish city of Glasgow. The focus seems to have again turned to climate finance. Countries are going to argue for more money to mitigate and adapt to the effects of climate change. And this important place before the upcoming climate change conference, it seems to have not been met, and money is not sure to be available before 2023. Professor Vasne, what do you think about the intent of the rich and industrialized nations for not fulfilling this important commitment?
I think that, as you have rightly said, that $100 billion were to be provided by the rich countries to the poor developing countries to really meet their adaptation as well as adopt means of containing carbon emission to maintain the temperature within the Paris Climate Agreement, that is below 2 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade. Now, this commitment has not been met very clearly. and the developed countries are dragging their feet, which is shaking the confidence of the global community about their seriousness of their commitment as well as of the implementation, what they really pledged for. We have seen that for quite good period of time, America was really out of the Paris Agreement. Now they have joined. But this kind of a behavior really shakes the confidence of the global community. I must say that there are lots of problems with whatever they have committed because they have not decided which country is going to contribute how much. So I think it's a very fluid and they don't seem to be very serious. Let me also mention that $100 billion is a minuscule amount. In fact, the developing countries, if they have to adopt and if they have to confirm their energy use as per the Paris Agreement objective, then trillions of dollars will be needed. However, if they have really met their commitment, it would have really given some kind of a confidence, encouraged them to really provide more aggressive commitments to put on the table at the Glasgow.
You spoke about the challenges for the developing countries. India, which is a very, very important player as a second most populous country, the third emitter as we sort of are known as, and India has again reiterated that efforts to avoid emissions during the development process are tied to the availability and level of international financing and technology transfer, since most of the developing countries still face complex developmental challenges. Speaking at a Middle East conference, Indian Environment Minister has clearly said COP26 must deliver concrete action plan on climate finance and technology transfer. Otherwise, this whole summit would not achieve what it is intended for. What do you think India should be talking about? Because as you know, there's a government meeting tomorrow which will decide how India should be taking its stand in this conference.
No, I think India is very clear that it is an issue which requires immediate attention as well as commitment by the emitters of the warming gases and the kind of the legacy emission that they have, and thus they owe a great deal in terms of compensating what they have been enjoying. They need to change their lifestyle dramatically and come forward to show and suggest that how in a time-bound manner they are going to contain the emission of warming gases from now on in a very rigorous manner and in a very significant quantity. Unless that is there, it will not be possible for any one country to do enough. India has been very, very straightforward and taking very forward-looking decisions. We have got Global Alliance, which ultimately also got the UN, approval. And for that, India has also proposed one sun, one world, one grid. Now, this kind of an proposal is something which requires commitment from the countries. For this, as it will have a great impact in reducing carbon emission. But this requires capital investment. And for that, again, finances are needed. And therefore, it is time that this proposal, which India has been proposing, must also be financed. And countries must forward to provide the necessary finance for this, so that a clean energy permanent source may be available, because sun shines all the 24 hours, but in some places it is dark and some places there is a sunlight. So one can really compensate from one area to another if we really see that one sun, one world and one grid concept gets implemented and it is really gets the support as well as the required financing over a period of time to make it happen as a viable alternative to the fossil fuels that are being consumed in larger and larger quantity. So I think you have mentioned that India is third emitter. But I think it is important for us to know that our total contribution at present is only 7% out of 100. So I think although we are third, but the difference between the second and the third is huge. And also if we take per capita emission of carbon dioxide, then we are well below the global average. So I think all these things have to be said along with this when we say that we are the third largest emitter. In fact, look at our population and look at the developmental stage. We have not really used any of the carbon space which others have already utilized. and have left very little for other countries to make use of. So I think here is also a question of carbon justice or environmental justice. So I think these are some of the things which we have to be very careful. And without making any commitment of net zero, I think we should really insist of commitments and deep cuts into the emission by the developed countries, and also enhance, the stepping up of the financing for the developing countries to really invest in their adaptation to make up for the losses that they are suffering because of the global warming and climate change that is taking place.
Now, as we know, the Prime Minister Modi is going to attend this global summit in Glasgow. And there is a talk of the first transnational network of solar power grids, and that will be up and running with the help from UK. And India and UK are sort of coming together to make this big announcement where they'll be building a solar power grid connecting 140 countries. So how is that going to work? And it obviously shows India's leadership position in terms of alternative energy sources. Could you tell us how is this exactly going to work?
No, I think it is going to work very well, provided it is executed the way that has been conceived. The point is very clear that sun is not available during the night. And sun hours are limited and they keep changing. And as the sun moves or the earth moves, I think the amount of sunlight available to different countries becomes differentially available. And as a result, during the night, I think either you should store this energy, which is going to be expensive at the same time, which requires high capital investment, and which is also not very environmentally benign, because storage systems are required and they also need further mining and more investment in terms of carbon or in terms of energy. And thus, the grid means that if the sunlight is not available, then the areas which are now receiving sunlight can supply if we have a common grid. So I think these are some of the advantages which completely negate the requirement of burning fossil fuel during the night for this purpose, and for really completely shunning away the coal-fired power plants, which at present are providing a very major, share of energy generation around the world. So I think these are some of the very important things which are attached to this concept. And therefore, as it unfolds and as it becomes a reality, only when the financing becomes available.
We discuss about the challenges with the financing of this. We have also seen the developed countries are differing from technology transfer. One can understand the money part, they are not yet contributed. But if they're really serious about cutting carbon emission in the developing and poor countries, what is stopping them from necessary technology transfers to these countries?
So I think they are very serious about it, and they just don't want to really commit anything on this account. This is very simple and straightforward, for a simple reason that in this meeting at Glasgow, like many other meetings earlier, there are people from industry and they have a lobby. And this lobby doesn't really allow this kind of a thing to happen, because then they say that innovation and the incentive for innovation for more important technologies to come for reducing carbon emission will not take place if we do not keep this as an important, consideration. So I think this question of giving up the patents and giving up the technology transfer free of cost for the developing countries freely and happily doesn't exist. I mean, this kind of a thing is very cautiously guarded through the negotiating, somersaulting and all kinds of diplomatic maneuvering. And therefore, it is like this. And we should also remember that many of these or some of these delegations will have members from the industries and from the technological innovators which are really possessing these kind of patents and these kinds of exclusive rights. And they just don't want to really do away with their inventions as well as with their technology that they have developed after making initial investment. So I think these are the considerations which are really holding them back to commit on these. because they are the one which are going to also not completely sacrifice the interest of their industry. And thus we find that there are serious issues about it, and it is an issue which is still vexing and will continue to be discussed. And we have to really see that how it is going to be resolved is very difficult. At least I can foresee that the Glasgow meeting will not be able to settle this issue as they should have done.
Thank you for your time, Professor Varshney.
Thank you.
Moving on to sports, in badminton, Sameer Verma advanced to the second round of men's singles of the French Open in Paris on Tuesday. Sameer Verma beat South Korea's Lee Dong-kyun by 21-14, 21-12 in the opening round. Sameer Verma will next face Indonesia's Shesa Hiren Rustavito. Meanwhile, the mixed doubles pair of Dhruv Kapila and N. Sikki Reddy were knocked out in the first round. Two-time Olympic medalist P.V. Sindhu will begin her women's singles campaign on Wednesday against Denmark's Julie Daval Jacobsen, while Kidambi Srikanth has been drawn against Kento Momoto of Japan. In T20 World Cup cricket, South Africa defeated the West Indies by 8 wickets in Dubai. Chasing a target of 144 runs, Proteas achieved it in 18.2 overs. Earlier put into bat, Caribbeans made 143 for the loss of 8 wickets in the stipulated 20 overs. In another match which is underway now at Sharjah, Pakistan were 127 for 5 in 18.1 overs against New Zealand when reports last came in. Earlier, Pakistan won the toss and asked Black Caps to bat first. All India Radio is broadcasting ball-by-ball commentary of the World Cup matches.
The sea phase of the maiden bilateral tri-service exercise Konkan Shakti 2021 between the UK and the Indian Armed Forces commenced off the Konkan coast in the Arabian Sea. The Konkan Shakti exercise began on 21st of October and will culminate on 27th of October. The United Kingdom's Carrier Strike Group CSG, led by HMS Queen Elizabeth, is also participating. The Chief of the General Staff of British Army, General Sir Mark Carleton-Smith, who is on a 4-day visit to India on Tuesday, laid a wreath at National War Memorial and received a Guard of Honour at the South Block. General Sir Mark Carleton-Smith called on Chief of Defence Staff General Bipin Rawat and exchanged views on further strengthening bilateral defence cooperation between India and UK.
Now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes astronomers find signs of a planet outside our galaxy. The Wall Street Journal reports that rainfall shortage leaves huge part of South America in drought. The Globe and the Mail writes that Japanese startup targets supercar users with $680,000 hover bike. The Guardian reports that post-lockdown cold spur sales at Strepsils and Nurofen maker. And Gulf Times writes, Shura Council holds first session, select speaker and deputy speaker.
A quick look at the headlines once again. In Afghanistan, dozens of women protest in Kabul against school closures for girls. ASEAN pulls off Myanmar for non-participation in the summit meeting. World Meteorological Organization says greenhouse gas at a new record levels, temperature rise to far exceed Paris Agreement targets. US lifts existing stringent travel restrictions, issues new vaccine rules for international travel. BIMSTEC to adopt connectivity's master plan in upcoming Colombo summit. India's Sameer Verma advances to second round of men's singles of French Open badminton. And at the T20 World Cup, South Africa beat West Indies by 8 wickets at Dubai. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnavajan, by artists from Austria on their National Day. And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.